U.S. President Donald Trump threatening new tariffs today on Canadian lumber and dairy. It comes a day after he announced a one-month pause on some tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods. Ottawa's response today, a $6 billion aid package to support Canadian businesses through this trade war with the states.
The U.S. Canada relationship has always been complicated. Neighbors, allies, trading partners, but also rivals in industries like dairy, steel, and lumber. Now, it's lumber that has become the latest battlefield. The Trump administration has slapped Canada with crushing duties, and the impact is already visible. Exports collapsing, mills closing, prices surging. It's not just a Canadian story. It's about housing costs in the U.S., jobs on both sides of the border, and a global economy caught in a new wave of tariff wars. So what exactly happened? In mid-2025, Trump's Commerce Department imposed tariffs as high as 35.19% on Canadian softwood lumber, accusing Canada of unfair subsidies and pricing practices. This isn't new. America has accused Canada of subsidizing its industry for decades, particularly over the way Canadian provinces set stumpage fees, the rates companies pay to harvest trees from government land. But this time, the tariffs are heavier than ever, and the timing couldn't be worse. Canada's lumber sector is massive, worth an estimated $87 billion, or about US $63 billion. It supports more than 200,000 jobs, many in small towns where sawmills are the backbone of the local economy. Lumber is Canada's second largest export to the United States, fueling not just cross-border trade, but America's own construction industry. When the U.S. slaps tariffs on this industry, the impact doesn't stop at the border. It ricochets into every corner of the housing market. Already, the numbers are grim. In August, Canadian lumber exports to the U.S. collapsed, forcing mills to cut back production. Lumber prices fell 25% in just 1 month, leaving Canadian producers scrambling to survive. The drop isn't just because of tariffs. Demand in the U.S. housing sector is also slowing, with high interest rates and construction bottlenecks reducing home builder confidence. But together, the perfect storm has arrived. Weaker demand, higher tariffs, collapsing exports, and here's where it gets personal. If you're an American family hoping to buy a home, these tariffs could push that dream further out of reach. Lumber is a key ingredient in almost every home framing. Flooring, roofing. When tariffs raise the cost of imported lumber, builders pass those costs on to buyers. Already, U.S. home builders are warning that housing affordability, which has been in crisis for years, will get even worse. The National Association of Home Builders noted that the tariffs could add thousands of dollars to the cost of a single new home. In an era where mortgage rates are already high, that's devastating. On the Canadian side, the human cost is no less severe. Entire towns in British Columbia, Quebec, and Ontario rely on sawmills for their survival. When mills slow down, layoffs follow. When exports collapse, those paychecks vanish. Families are left scrambling. Local governments face revenue shortfalls, and communities already battered by inflation feel the sting of another economic blow. Prime Minister Mark Carney has tried to step in. In August, Ottawa announced a $12 billion relief package for the lumber industry. That includes loan guarantees, grants, and support to help companies diversify into other markets. But even Carney admitted this is a band-aid, not a cure. If the U.S. doesn't ease up, Canada faces long-term damage to one of its most important industries. Trump, meanwhile, is doubling down. At campaign rallies, he calls Canadian lumber a rigged system, accusing Ottawa of undercutting American loggers. He frames the tariffs as a win for U.S. workers, promising that American mills will thrive when Canadian imports dry up. But here's the reality. America doesn't produce enough lumber to meet its own needs. Even if U.S. mills ramped up production, it wouldn't replace the massive volume imported from Canada. The result? A shortage, higher prices, and a blow to both countries. This is not the first time the U.S. and Canada have fought over lumber. The so-called softwood lumber dispute has flared up at least 5 times since the 1980s. Each time, the U.S. accuses Canada of subsidies. Canada defends its practices, and both sides end up in drawn-out negotiations or legal battles at the World Trade Organization. But Trump's tariffs mark the fiercest escalation in years, and unlike past disputes, this one is colliding with a global trade war. Think about the bigger picture. In the last year, Trump has slapped 50% tariffs on India, sparking diplomatic fury in New Delhi. He's escalated disputes with Europe, prompting boycotts of American goods. He's shaken the Caribbean with controversial military actions disguised as trade enforcement, and he's threatened tariffs on pharmaceuticals from Switzerland, a move that could destabilize global medicine supplies. Add Canada's lumber war to the mix, and you see the pattern. Trump is using tariffs as his weapon of choice in a global campaign of economic pressure. The consequences are already rippling out. U.S. homebuilder sentiment has dropped to its lowest point in months, reflecting fears of higher construction costs. Canadian lumber towns are facing layoffs. Investors are fleeing lumber stocks, worried that prolonged tariffs will choke profitability. Even American consumers are starting to notice higher prices for new homes, fewer construction projects, and a market that feels increasingly unstable. And the politics are just as volatile. In Canada, anti-American sentiment is rising. Newspapers warn of economic warfare, and politicians across the spectrum are demanding a tougher response. Some call for retaliatory tariffs on American goods, while others argue Canada should pivot harder toward European and Asian markets to reduce reliance on the U.S. For a country whose economy is deeply tied to its southern neighbor, this is a dangerous crossroads. In the U.S., the fallout could be equally explosive. Trump's base may cheer his tough stance, but middle-class families trying to buy homes won't be cheering when they face higher prices, nor will construction workers when projects are delayed or canceled. And as analysts warn, any slowdown in housing reverberates across the economy, hurting everything from furniture sales to local tax revenues. Global voices are weighing in too. Trade experts at the UN have warned that weaponizing essential commodities like lumber destabilizes not just bilateral trade, but the global system itself. Economists note that just as tariffs on steel and aluminum reshaped global supply chains, tariffs on lumber could push countries to seek alternatives, fragmenting markets even further. And yet, despite the chaos, Trump insists this is about fairness. America first, he says, casting himself as the champion of U.S. workers. But critics point out the irony. His tariffs may destroy Canadian jobs, but they could just as easily destroy American dreams of affordable housing. When politics weaponizes wood, everyone gets splinters. The after effects are already visible. Canadian mills are scaling back production. Families are losing jobs. U.S. builders are raising alarms. Investors are jittery. And in both Ottawa and Washington, leaders are bracing for a protracted fight. The broader lesson here is stark. In today's world, tariffs don't just affect spreadsheets, they affect lives. They decide whether a young family can buy a home, whether a sawmill worker keeps their job, whether a community survives. They shape the very roofs over our heads. And when leaders wield tariffs as blunt instruments, the damage spreads faster than anyone expects. So where does this go next? Negotiations will likely drag on, as they always have in the lumber dispute. Canada will push for exemptions, the U.S. will demand concessions, and both sides will posture for their domestic audiences. But the stakes are higher this time. With the global economy fragile, housing markets strained, and political tempers flaring, this trade war risks spilling into a full-blown crisis. The collapse of Canada's lumber exports under Trump's tariffs is more than a trade story. It's a chain reaction touching every nail, every beam, every frame in North America. What began as a fight over stumpage fees now threatens housing affordability, jobs, and the fragile balance of U.S. Canada relations. In the sawmill towns of British Columbia and Quebec, the machines are slowing, workers are being sent home, and families wonder if their livelihoods will ever return. In the suburbs of Dallas and Detroit, homebuyers are calculating costs, watching lumber prices swing, and asking if the American dream of owning a house is slipping further away. And at the highest level, two governments are staring each other down, each unwilling to blink first. Trump's tariffs are designed for headlines, but the deeper story is how easily an economic weapon can turn into a social wound. So as the sawdust settles, the question isn't just who wins this fight, it's how many ordinary people will pay the price before it ends.